Move all those pillows. Let's sit by mom. Right here. Right here, Kaylee. No, over
okay.
here. Over here.
Good evening, everyone. As you know, the Bronco game is on. So tonight I get to do the lesson.
Speaking of history,
I hope I am doing this right, Emma.
yeah,
I want to tell everyone about one of the most inspiring 1 hour shows I watched yesterday afternoon. And if you can get it on YouTube, it's called Garland, Connor, or O'Connor. He's a 5'3" man in the U.S. Army. He got more medals than anybody. And it took him 45 years to get the Medal of Honor. And he's only 5'3", and most inspiring show. Everything he did to help us win was unbelievable. Everybody ought to look at it. YouTube, it's Garland, Connor, or O'Connor. I'm not sure which.
He got the Medal of Honor.
Yeah, after he passed away.
and good evening, everyone. So I'm excited about this lesson tonight. In preparation for this, it kind of went a different direction than what I thought it was going to go. And because when I get into the preparation, sometimes I'll get stuck on something, and this one wasn't anything unusual on that. But the material, at least in my viewpoint, was just fantastic. And so hopefully you'll be blessed by what we're going to have tonight. And so tonight we are talking about, this is lesson number 9, who dimmed the dark ages, or who dimmed the lights, the church entering the dark ages. And we're still in the same time period that we've been working on. And let's see, Jesse said it was working. And we got a little technical problem here. So we'll get that fixed. And while Jesse's taking care of that, let's see. I wanted to read a little excerpt from this book called The Rule of St. Benedict. And this is a translation out of that. And they're talking about the weekly reader. And in their monasteries, in their monastery service, they would have somebody that would read. And they said every time that anybody reads, said he should recite the following verse, which everyone in the oratory will repeat 3 times. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall declare your praise. And so that's something that they would do in those times. I'm not going to ask you to repeat that tonight, but that's our prayer tonight as we go through this lesson, and hopefully you'll be blessed by what you hear tonight. So first is dispatch, and that is from the Latin roots dis, which it means lack of or apart, away from, and impedico, which you can look at that and you say like an impediment, which means apart or away from. And what that means is to send away. So if you're dispatching something, you are sending it away double. It's really what that means. And so a couple of dispatches tonight, if you want to get a hold of me, here's my contact information. If you're live, a dispatch or a question, you can send that to Jesse Black at that number. If you're recorded, email me your comment in the church app. I did have YouTube on there, but I took that out because nobody was doing it, and I got to remember to go back in and check it. So I said, don't comment on YouTube. If you do, probably not going to read it. And then the last is to make sure you hit our Church Center apps. But the real dispatch that I want to say tonight is the next lesson will not be until December 7th. And that's a day that will live in infamy. Not because of my lesson, though. I think it's primarily because we're going to be watching the church kids here at the house, and it ends at 5 o'clock, and then we get our dinner started at 5:30, and so it'll be kind of fun to do that. So moving on, heard on the street this week. All right, A couple of things. Harold Duty had some really encouraging comments that he made to me. And he said the common man's understanding would only have come from leaders and teachers of the time. And he's talking about how people would have understood things. And that's true. And unfortunately, nothing has changed. We still do that. A lot of times we don't get into the weeds and do the study ourselves. We actually just listen to what somebody else says. Not any offense tonight about those things, but it does behoove us. And Harold, that's a great statement of making sure that we do our due diligence and study things. Jesse said the first part, Jerome, was very interesting, but that second part, where we talked about Augustine and Pelagius last week, he said, that's what I'm really interested in. And so Jesse's made his comments known, and so you now know his preference, and I thought that was interesting. And then Cat Music actually said something significant. All right, he said, we need to spend more time on the Christian disciplines, and I cannot agree with you more, Cat. And so for that comment, I'm going to give Cat this book, The Rule of St. Benedict. And I've looked through this thing, and it's kind of interesting to read it, but we will do that. So Cat, at some point in time, I'll have to get this over to you. Actually, I may give it to Mark so he can take it over your direction tonight. And then lastly, a new listener, Adam Como, said, what does it say when our positions matter more than the people? And I thought that was a very relevant comment, and you're going to see that again tonight, that as we run through these things, positions may matter more than people, and that can be a problem, not just then, but today. History does repeat itself. That comment does. Adam, I want to make a comment about him, and I don't know whether he's live or not. Jesse kind of sent him the link to these, and he said he watched the first one, and then he watched the next 5 or 6 of them, like binge watched them. And I said, he is a glutton for punishment if he did that. So anyway, so Adam, I appreciate your tuning in, and hopefully we will make these things just as relevant as they were back in the day that they did that. All right, so what's on the docket tonight? I want to kind of reset where we are in history. This is going to be real brief on that. And then I'm going to move into the Council of Ephesus and how we get to there. And then the last I'm going to do is talk about Benedict, or a lot of people call him Saint Benedict, and in particular, the rule of Saint Benedict. So, that being said, what are the Dark Ages? So let's just kind of start with the definition. And the first thing, if you went and Googled Dark Ages, the first thing you're going to go is they're not dark. They're not really the Dark Ages. That was actually a moniker that was tabbed on them during the Enlightenment period. All right, so the Age of Enlightenment said, we have got all the light now. Those were the Dark Ages. And so that's one of the things about it. So the period of time, though, is basically from about 500 AD to nearly 1000 AD. So that's the kind of the period of time that they would call the Dark Ages. It's really the early Middle Ages. And the next thing is that is a Western Empire event only. Because if you went to the East, none of this stuff is a problem. The East has money. The East has, the church. The East has government. And they will continue on through this period of time up until about the 1500s. Actually, almost the year 1500 is what they will continue on with. The population in this period of time actually dropped from 65 million to 50 million. And there could be some reasons for that. There's a couple of them that I know that as I was looking through this that I found about this. One of them was they had global climate change. And that's a big topic for us today. It wasn't a topic then because they didn't have the way to monitor that. But it was something, and what happened was the temperature actually got colder. And what that meant was food production declined. And not only food production declined because of that, but it also declined because of some world events that were happening, which we'll look at in just a moment. The last is, and this is probably the most significant thing, is the Huns showed up. And that was about 370. They're going to kind of keep working their way, and they become a huge factor of this, and that's mass migration. So as the Huns move from, let's talk about Mongolia and Eastern Russia, Siberia, and they kind of come west, and they like the climate better. And by the way, the people out there are pretty easy to whip up on, and so they are the bullies, and everybody in the neighborhood heads south. All right, and so this is kind of what the map looks like. And if you look at this one, you can see the green lines up here. That's the Huns. And over this period of time, you can see them, they're moving over here to the west. They come up in here to northern Gaul and up in that area. They're going to head south. They're going to come back in and circle back around. So they kind of wander on. They are somewhat nomadic, but when they do that, they are fierce warriors. They have this ability to shoot arrows and ride horses at the same time, which that was a game changer from a weapon standpoint, and nobody, including Roman legions, could withstand them. And so as they come through, they wipe people out. And so when they do that, they're going to send people that they invade, they're going to send them south. And so that's when you get the Goths, and you're going to hear Visigoths and Ostrogoths, and you'll hear those two terms. That basically means Eastern and Western, if you will. So the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths will come through. There's some other groups that you'll see over here. The Alans, it says Alan, but it's really Alan is how you pronounce that. The Subi are here. And then the last one are the Vandals, which they're going to come down and come through north of Africa. Now, Africa was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. And when you have a group that comes through and they raid and they plunder and they kill, what happens to production? People don't start farming. They quit. And so that's another reason for the lack of production in that. And let's see, did I miss anybody there? The Visigoths, Vandals, Alan, Subi, and then the Huns. And so you have all these coming in from the north, and they're basically going to hit, for the most part, Western Europe. You can see that they come over to Constantinople over there if you look at your map, but there's something that Constantinople is going to stop them, and you're going to see that pretty quickly in a slide a little bit later. And so this is what's going on in here. Rome gets sacked in 410 by Alaric, who is a Goth. And so Visigoth, I think, is actually what he is. And so they're going to do that. They even keep going south. And for the most part, they're going to take it over, and they're going to end the Western Roman Empire in about 472. So what changed during this time? Pax Romana. Remember what Pax Romana is? Peace, right? Roman peace. It was one of the things that Rome came in. They had law and order in here, and so you're going to see that, I think, down someplace else. But they had that in place, and they enforced that. The other thing is, I heard one of the guys I listened to said he had a question, what made Rome so great? And they said it's a real boring answer, infrastructure. They had roads, and you could travel the roads safely. At this point in time, you could travel from end to end of the Roman Empire in about 2 weeks, which is pretty impressive considering their day and time. And so that's going to happen. Pax Romana ends. There is, and this is, by the way, again, all Western. There is no imperial government during this time. It's going to just completely fall apart. The imperial economy will go the way the government goes. So you don't have production of coins. You don't have regulation of anything. It's going to be more tribal, more regional, and that's what you'll see. That education, it becomes very limited. You're going to, in fact, find it only in the Benedictine monasteries that we'll look at a little bit later. The other is that languages change. What do they speak in Western Europe now? If you talk about this Eastern and Western Europe, what do they speak? It's not Latin. You get French and Spanish and Portuguese and German, and so you start going through all that, and you go like, oh, what changed on that? Well, there was this period of time that all changed. Patriotism, nobody's loyal to the government anymore. It's like, what have they done for me lately? And the answer is nothing. And so that will happen. And then cultural values are changing. And so leading into this period of time, you think about the values that people would have, or the virtues that they would have, which were Greek. And they would talk about all these virtues that they would go through. And those things basically come to an end. It becomes more survival mode. And I'm going to get mine. I don't care about you. So those are the things, some of the things that changed, and there's probably many more that I won't cover. All right, so let's look at the church in the Middle Ages. All right, and we're going to look at this from an Eastern standpoint. The Eastern church has a very strong tradition, and they are mostly unified. You can kind of quibble on that some, but they're mostly unified. They're going to follow the tradition, and they're going to continue that for another 1,000 years. They are the fabric. The church is the fabric of that Eastern society. And it's interwoven very closely and very tightly with the government. And that, you can't overstate that. And it's for the most part patriarch-led or bishop-led, but bishop's going to be in over a patriarch, and there's 4 patriarchs that are in the east: Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and what am I missing? One other, Jerusalem. So those are the patriarchs, the historical patriarchs, and they kind of rule over the areas. And those will, as we go through this time, something's going to happen to most of those, and it's going to be called the rise of Islam. And we'll kind of look at that later on, probably next year when we get into that period of time. On the western side, they're in survival mode. And the church is in survival mode because everybody is. And so that's going to affect it. So what happens, you have societal leadership changes, and the church actually becomes the societal leadership. They are going to lead what's going on in society. And it's going to be centered in one place, and that's going to be Rome. And it was the only thing that was somewhat stable in this time period. So you could go from place to place to place, and you might have a different government, you might have different language and everything else, but what stays the same during that time is the church. And it's going to assume temporal authority. And when I say temporal authority, I'm talking about the pointy end of the sword. The church will assume discipline, and they're going to assume the role of law and order. So what the church says goes, goes. And so that's one of the things that you'll see the church in the Middle Ages. And with that kind of power, what happens is you're going to have abuse of power. And we'll, as we get into the Middle Ages, that you'll see that more and more. And there are lots and lots of horror stories that I'd love to tell if we have enough time. All right. So the developing power of the Roman bishop, because again, it's getting centralized, and by this time, it is starting to really coalesce, especially for the West, especially for the West. This is the Roman Catholic version about this. They say that Jesus said to Peter, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And we know probably through lessons that you've heard, Peter is a word for rock, but he uses a different word there. He says upon this rock, and he's using a stone as opposed to like a foundation stone as opposed to a pebble. So Peter's a pebble, but he's saying on this foundation stone, I will build my church. As Protestants, we like to say that foundation stone is the confession that Peter made before that, all right? Because if you remember that, and you got to back that up a little bit, and he had asked him, who do you say I am? And Peter said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he says, you're Peter. Basically saying, I'm Christ, you're Peter, upon this rock. Which one, Peter or the confession? And I like to say it was the confession, but Roman Catholics will have a different version of that. The next is that Peter gave the first sermon at Pentecost, and he did. And that is a true statement, and so you go through with that. They will also say that Peter established the church in Rome, which is not true. There were any number of people that could have established the church. I always like to think that the Roman centurion was the one that took it back to Rome and helped to establish that church. I have no basis of proof. That's just what I like to think. But definitely by the time Peter gets there was an active church going, and it was a fairly strong church as well, too. They will also state that he served as the first bishop of Rome. There is absolutely no evidence for that. I'm kind of picking this apart, but I'm telling you how it arrived. No evidence of that. There is evidence that Peter did go to Rome, but that's about as far as it got. He did not, as far as you know, he looked like he may have gone there and delivered some sermons. And then they will say that there is apostolic succession, that since Peter was the first bishop of Rome and he was an apostle, he's going to let the next bishop of Rome succeed him, and that's going to perpetuate all the way down to our very day. And that's what they would like to believe. And then the Bishop of Rome was recognized as first among equals. Now, there might be a little truth to this. I'm going to say that there probably wasn't, because if you would have gone to the Bishop of Antioch or the Bishop of Alexandria or even the Bishop of Constantinople, they're going to look at these things and say, no, that's not the case. He doesn't have any more say than I do. And I'm not talking about Peter. I'm talking about just the bishop. Along comes this guy. And we're talking about this time period. Leo the Great, he became the bishop/pope in 440. Leo, he'll be the first one that I would call actually a pope. He really served the role as a pope. Even though another guy that we looked at earlier called Damasus, he was pretty strong in that way. And anyway, so you can kind of look at that, but it's like, well, who was the first one? I don't think it was Peter. If you're going to talk about this guy, okay, I might buy this guy. Damasus, maybe if you could push me and twist my arm, I could do it a little bit. He basically filled a vacuum. Now you got to think about this. Empire's falling apart. He's going to fill this vacuum, and he actually does a fantastic job in stepping up because there were no leaders. So who is in charge? He basically steps in and gets in charge. He was the first to have temporal power and actually enforce rules. I'm not talking about just church rules. It's like if you broke the law, he's sending people after you, all right, to arrest you and everything else. So he's the first to have that kind of temporal power, and he was the first to insist that he was the Pope, and he will say that, and he will say that to other people, and he will go on with that. And then he was also the guy that faced down Attila. And if you remember Attila the Hun, nasty, nasty guy, one of the worst bad guys in all of history. He comes down, and the story goes that Leo went out to Attila's camp, faced him down and says, "You can't attack this city. You need to turn around and head back." And Attila did. Later they say Attila said, "While he was speaking to me, I saw Peter and Paul right there with him." Now, whether he saw them is up for debate, but people believed it. And sometimes what you believe becomes your reality, and so that is one of the stories that would tell about that. And so he faced down Attila. Now, going to the Eastern Church and State, who's in charge at this time, I'm going to look at one particular guy, and that is Theodosius II, or Theo II, or T2, or whatever you want to call it. Theodosius is a mouthful. He's actually, I think, the grandson of Theodosius I. If you go back to Theodosius I, he was in Spain, got called back to Constantinople because of the battle at Adrianople, which wiped out the Roman army. I mean, he lost two of the, I think there was six legions, I think is what it was. He lost two of them at the Battle of Adrianople, and the Goths took them out. And so basically, all of a sudden, you've got some problems. You don't have any military defending your base, and Constantinople is your capital. Nobody's there to defend it. He's called back, clean up the mess. He actually does a lot of things. He's given a weak hand to work through, but he starts calling in troops from all over the place. When he starts calling those troops in, off of the Rhine River or the Danube, which would have been the two borders, these other guys are looking and going, saying, "Let's see, I got Attila and these Huns on this side, and who's over there guarding the stuff? Nobody. I'm coming through the back door." And so that's a lot of what happened with him. Theodosius II, though, it becomes the emperor at age 9 months. All right. He actually was the co-Augustus with his father at the age of 9 months. All right. And that's, it was just, so he got it by rights of heredity, of his bloodline. His dad is going to die at age 7 when he's 7 years old. So he becomes the sole ruler of and I'll just call it the Eastern Empire. We'll call it the Byzantine Empire. Many, many years later, they would have called it the Roman Empire. And so he's ruled with a regency. And so as his education goes, as his guidance goes, so goes the empire. And he actually had some pretty good guys that were working with him. He assumed emperor when he was 15 years old. Now, big job, right? He's been trained for it. He's been schooled in it. He's been coached in it, but that's where he is. He's emperor at age 15. He's actually going to be ruler for 42 years, which is one of the longest periods in Roman history. Now, I think when they count that, they go back to 9 months, because he's going to die, in his 40s. He actually dies of a horse riding accident, and that really threw things into a spin. His big contributions, and I'm going to list 4 of them here. One is the Theodosian Law Code, and so there had all sorts of laws. As you can imagine, the Roman Empire at this time had been in existence for, Angela, help me out here. We're in about the year 500, and they started 800? No, they started 350 something. I think they're around 800 years as they've been in existence, and there's been all sorts of laws created by the Senate and everything else. he says, I want to clean this up. So he actually calls people in. They pull all this together. This fits, that fits. We're getting rid of stuff. And he actually pulls together the Theodosian Law Code, which enables stability in the Eastern Empire too. It helped things out. The other is the Theodosian Walls. All right, and this is a picture on the right of the Theodosian Walls. If you think about Constantinople, these walls, by the way, are still standing today. And what you see here is you see the parapets that are way up high. That is the final wall. Below that, you can see another wall there with some other parapets. There was enough room on there to run chariots through, all right, on that part of the wall. So if you needed to mobilize the army from one section to the other, you could run them around through that. And then below that, behind this one, you see another lower wall. Inside of that is thorns and brambles and logs and anything else that's an impediment to get through. And it'd be difficult to walk through that at any time, but if you think about guys from the top shooting arrows down at you, not going to happen. And then you see in front of that this moat that runs, I think they said is about 15 or 18 feet across. And then you have another wall that's probably 8 foot tall or so. So if you're going to take Constantinople from the western side, the eastern side's got, remember, the northeast and southeast, they've got the water there. And they, by the way, they have walls like that even at that time on those sides, but you're going to have a hard time taking it. So much so that Attila brought his army down because he'd been kicking tail all over the place. And he says, yeah, let's go take Constantinople. We got a lot of money down there. He basically took his army, looked up, said, let's go take that other city back over there because this ain't going to happen. These walls stood for so long. I think they were, until the Ottomans came in 1450 or something like that. That's how long they stood. That's how long they repelled armies. And so you have safety on there. And there's all sorts of stories about the Theodosian walls. One of the ones that I liked is that the army had to go out at one point in time, and the army was all gone. There was nobody to defend it. There were very, very few people to defend it. And so the people in town got together, and they basically paraded up and down the walls to make the opposing army think there were people back there. And that was one of the things they did, and it worked. They weren't attacked, they weren't taken, they couldn't get to them. And so that was one of the things. There's some other things very interesting about Constantinople. If you go there today, or next year for some people, they have these cisterns that are underground that are massive. I mean, they could hold hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. And those, you can get to tour those today. It's, when Kathy and I went, that was one of the things that we looked and we were like, oh my goodness. And anyway, so lots of stories about the Theodosian Wall. So something about what's going on there. The other is that he established the first university ever, all right? University of Constantinople. And it was like I'm going to tax my brain. I probably should have put it up there like 487 or something like that. And they had, they had all sorts of things that they would study there: music, law, rhetoric, all the things that you would think about a college today. They have those things there at that university. And the last thing that he was known for was religious controversy. And that leads us in to talk about the Council of Ephesus. So let's talk about the Council of Ephesus a little bit. And church controversy, you say? Well, imagine that. So Theodosius was enamored with this guy named Nestorius. I don't know if I spelled that right. Nestorius, yeah, that's right. Nestorius was a priest. He was an eloquent priest. He was a monastic priest. And Theodosius admired him. And so he says, why don't you come be the bishop of Constantinople? Now, if there's any religious job that you probably don't want, that's the one. And Nestorius comes in, and he's going to have some interesting things that are going to happen to him. So Nestorius, though, and so in 428, he made him the bishop of Constantinople. By the way, that tweaked some guys' nose, especially a guy down in Alexandria called Cyril, and we're going to see him in just a second. And Cyril and some others were like, how can you, the emperor, make the bishop? All right, now this happened before, right? That's not anything new. Even Constantine pulled in Eusebius. You remember Eusebius? So it's not like this is unprecedented, but yet this is what happened. And there were other people that kind of had some problems with that. And so it didn't put Theodosius, and how old is he going to be at this time? I didn't do my math. Anyway, so at 428, he's still a fairly young guy. And I think he's in his 20s. And so he's making this move to put in one of the most important jobs in all the church. And he's making him the bishop. Well, Nestorius is looking around and doing what they do, and they reading and do things like that. And he comes up with this word, and I don't have my Greek thing here, but I would put him up here. Theotokos. All right. Theotokos, God bearer. And it's used to refer to Mary. So Mary, the mother of God, is what we would translate that as. So, but it's really, literally is God bearer. All right. And he's looking at this and going like, well, wait a second. How can you bear God if he was existing already? And so that's what a problem. And Nestorius is going, I got a problem with this. Anybody else have a problem with that? And so that goes on. And so he comes up with a term. He says, she really should be called Christotokos, Christ bearer. Now, as happens in church things, people lose their mind, all right, and over semantics. And so here was a Nestorius question. How can Jesus Christ, being part man, not be partially a sinner as well too, since man is by definition a sinner since the fall? Did original sin apply to Jesus? That's really the other way of saying this question. All right, and I see some heads going like, no, that didn't happen. But the question is, you look at that and go like, well, did you believe in original sin? Because if you did he inherit that? And that became a very, very difficult question to answer, and people lost their mind. So let's let the semantics begin and church politics, because we don't like Nestorius anyway, right? So he convinces, and that goes on, and I mean, the battle is raging. So we've got some other things that we've dealt with. This is the topic du jour. And when I mean the battle is raging, everybody talked about that. If you were the cobbler fixing shoes, you're talking about what Nestorius said and how he asked this question and going like, I think he's right, or I think he's wrong, or whatever. And so you see a huge, huge debate going on throughout everywhere. Gets the attention, obviously, of Theodosius because he's trying to keep peace, and people are ready. I mean, literally, they are ready to go to the streets to fight over this. And I mean, not verbally fight either. I mean, they are ready to go to the street because they're looking for a good fight all the time anyway. All right. So Nestorius convinces Theodosius to call a council, and they said, let's call it in Ephesus. Council is going to be all the bishops all over the empire. And so Theodosius, since he likes Nestorius, agrees to that. And so he sends out basically an invitation and saying, everybody come together, we're going to hash out this issue. Now, if you were in Rome or out west, you're going, what issue? All right. If you're in modern day France or Spain, this isn't an issue. This is an Eastern issue, all right, that's going on. And yet Theodosius calls everybody together. All right. So they all come, and I want this picture. This is a picture painted years later of the Council of Ephesus. And you'll see that on the throne there is Theodosius. And he's pointing at this guy over here. And this guy is Nestorius. All right? And he's got a devil on his back. That tells you how you think this is going to go down. All these are all the bishops up here. And over here on the right is going to be the people presenting the other side of the case, which would have been Cyril of Alexandria. And he's the bishop there too. So let's kind of see how that went on. And I don't know what this thing is in the middle of the table. I don't know if he's throwing the book at him or if he's referring to the book, but you can see he's got the scriptures out and he's holding those out saying, here's what the scriptures say. And on the other hand, they're going, hey, look here, here's what the scriptures say. And yet they can't get along on this. But you know who is wrong because he's got the devil on his back. All right. That's how later art is going to present this. All right. So that wasn't quite in the Dallas Morning News. So, all right. All right. So church politics, Alexandria versus Antioch. And this is where the battle lines are going to be drawn. So Nestorius is the bishop of Constantinople, big time dude, right? Cyril of Alexandria, where they have the library, they have so many other things that are going on. It's a very strong church. You got Augustine that's off here to the west and just west of Carthage and all that. So he's representing that North African group. And then he brings 50 bishops to the show. Or he brings 50 bishops, and they show up early, by the way. They show up like 2 weeks early because Alexandria is right on the port. Get on the ships, sail up there. All right. John of Antioch. All right. Now, this is not John Chrysostom. He was just like after this, but John of Antioch, he's a big time bishop. And he's going like, you know, we got some problems. I need to weigh in. And he sets out, and he's got 43 bishops that are from his bishopric or his see, and they're headed. They've got to travel overland to do all this, and they got to go through the mountains and everything else. One of the guys dies one of the bishops dies on the trip. They also encounter floods, and they show up about 5 days late. All right, so what do you think Cyril's going to do? Bishop be the gentleman and say, yeah, we'll wait for these guys. They'll show up one of these days. Not really. All right, so 431, the first session, Cyril calls this, opens the council up, and 68 bishops basically also object that were there, saying you cannot open this council without imperial permission. So Theodosius had actually sent a guy down saying, you're going to preside over this council, you're going to make sure peace is kept, you're going to bring the soldiers in, and there's not going to be any problem down here during this council. But the guy's not there. And so Cyril gets the thing started. Well, he tricks the imperial officer to come in and read the edict and assumes authority over the council, because that's basically what he did. He says he assumes that authority, and in absence of that, he's in charge. Now, Nestorius, right, he's got as much rank as Cyril. He says, I don't acknowledge your authority. Who gave you the right to run this council? Because I know how it's going to go if you're going to be in charge. So you kind of see the battle lines getting drawn here. The next is the Antioch group arrives about 5 days late. They look around and they say, you started this without us. And by the way, we don't recognize you as authority, Cyril, because I'm John of Antioch and you're just Cyril of Alexandria. I've got just as big weapons and everything else as you do. I've got as much authority as you do. And so he decides to go across the street, down the road, whatever, and start his own council. Makes sense, right? And by the way, he has the imperial legate with him when he does that. So which one's official? Well, let's go to the second session. The papal legate, because whoever was the Pope I'm not going to remember his name, the Pope of Rome at the time was not Leo. This was, I think, after Leo. Anyway, so he comes in, it was before Leo. He comes in, the papal legate, and he delivers a letter because in Rome, when they got wind of this, they called everybody together and said, let's have a synod. Now, the difference between a synod and a council, a synod is local or regional, all right? And so they can make their decisions on a local or regional basis. A council is ecumenical, means it has everybody involved. Well, the papal legate delivers a letter from the Pope, and they say the synod in Rome condemned Nestorius' teaching as Pelagianism. Now, that is a magic word because now everybody's condemning, right? We've talked about Pelagius and how, if you want to condemn somebody, you just say this right here. You can call him a traitor. So that's what's going on in the second session. So let's have a third session. A couple of days later, the papal letter is actually read to the emperor. The emperor shows up to preside over this council. And so it's read to the emperor, and the council, by the way, who does not have the Antiochian group because they're across the street, all right, he votes, the council votes to have Nestorius condemned. And then they say, council adjourned, can we leave and go home? Well, Theodosius looks at this and go like, hey, I'm not too sure we got accomplished what we want to accomplish. Let's keep meeting. All right, let's go on. Fourth session. A formal protest is lodged against John of Antioch. So he says, we're going to make it official. John, you cannot have your own council over there. All right. And so they send a summons out. John, you have got to come over here. All right. So that's what it is. And John won't even talk to their envoys. He's like, you can't order me around. And so he's sitting over on the other side saying, you can't do that. All right, so John, instead, he goes and sets a placard, billboard, whatever you want to call it, up in town, and he accuses the synod. He doesn't call them a council. He says that synod, he accuses them of Apollinarianism, another heresy. Having fun yet? All right, so let's do a fifth section. A new summons goes out from Cyril, and John ignores these guys too. And then John says, by the way, Cyril, you're excommunicated. Let's just take this further. And all these 34 bishops over here that are, on your side, you're excommunicated. You're just out. All right, how are you going to decide this? Sixth session, they develop canons. This is the council, not John's council. This is Cyril's council. The council condemns any departure from the creed established at Nicaea. Everybody can agree on that, right? We're going to condemn anybody that disagrees with Nicaea. All right. They're also going to have a seventh session, and they're going to base some other decrees. They're going to decree that Jesus was one person, not two persons. It's one of the things that kind of agrees with the Council of Nicaea. And they're going to say the Virgin Mary was to be called Theotokos, Mother of God, not Christotokos. So they're passing these decrees and these canons, and they decree that it's unlawful to write or compose a different faith as a rival to the Nicene Creed. By the way, there had been another council before this called the Council of Constantinople, which they actually added on to the Nicene Creed. But these guys come back and say, oh no, Nicene Creed or nothing. And by the way, it's because the papal legate and some of the people in Alexandria, they didn't recognize the Council of Constantinople. Now that's going to get recognized later and everything else. Well, the council approves these 5 canons, and they condemn Nestorius and Calestius, which is another one of his guys. And then they have a council that excommunicates anyone that doesn't accept what the council says. So who is going to decide this? The emperor, right? He's the one that created this mess. Let's let him decide this thing. By the way, he thought it was his right and duty, and he was called by God to do it. So what happens with him? I had to put this up there because I could just only think of this Elmer. Is that a Delmer? In Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? When these two guys are arguing, they say, well, what do you say, Delmer? And he says, I'm with you fellas. And that's basically what Theodosia does. He decrees in favor of both councils. Now, how's that going to go down? Kind of got a little bit of a problem there, right? Well, that meant that Cyril and all his company were deposed. And by the way, they were arrested and confined for a period of time. John and all his company, they're excommunicated because that was decided by the council. Nestorius, he sees this and goes like, you know what? I had a lot more fun when I was living by myself in a monastery. So he asked permission to step down, and he's going to leave. So that's going to happen. John of Antioch, he eventually caved into this. And he said, this is causing too much problem. We'll all agree to what these guys said. I don't see any problem with these things. So he kind of caves, and he accepted the council meeting. And he actually told Nestorius, by the way, Nestorius, all you need to do is just recant and say, I agree with the council, and everybody gets on, and we'll get along fine. Well, Nestorius never does do that. He's exiled to Persia, all right, what we would call Persia, and where the Assyrian church in the east still holds to Nestorianism. I was surprised by this, and Mark and Nate, you might have been there. We were at our Tuesday breakfast, and one of our guys that comes there had gone to India, and we're talking about some of the religions in India, and he says the Assyrian church of the east is a big presence in India. And I said, who in the world is that? And he goes, Nestorians. And I go, oh. And so it's just amazing that it still happens today. And so it just, just like when history comes back and slaps you in the face a little bit, you go like, oh, wow, it's still going on. And a major schism is going to happen between the East and the West church. You know why you got an Eastern church and a Western church? This right here was part of it. Now, just to kind of finish this, I think there are 7 official ecumenical councils that most churches recognize, Protestant and everything else. This is one of them. All right. If I go back and I read some of these things, it's like, I don't know that I agree with these things, but that's for us to determine later. All right. So lessons that we can learn from ecumenical councils and such like this. And these are just my random thoughts, by the way. First of all is I'll say this and I'll say this absolutely, they don't save you. Whatever that council determined as truth and heresy or whatever, that doesn't save you. The definitions may be beneficial coming out of this, but that doesn't mean that that's what saves you. They may not solve problems. Everything about getting together and trying to solve problems, and you create problems trying to solve problems, because sometimes they're just irreconcilable differences, right? They may create problems like divisions in the church. Decisions of councils are difficult to enforce. Who is to say which one of these was right, and then who's going to enforce it? And even Theodosius, in all his young wisdom, couldn't do that. Government and church shouldn't mix. Why does Theodosius need to be in the middle of this? That's a good lesson for us. Other broad church governmental efforts can fall into the same mix and the same traps. I think of today, and something that's been raging over the last few years, I think it's in the Methodist Church, is the position on homosexuality, transgenderism, and they try to decide it by ecumenical council. It's a Methodist ecumenical council, and it split, for all intents and purposes, it split the Methodist Church. Southern Baptist Convention, they have some of the very same things. So if you want to let some people in North Carolina decide what should be right for your church, become part of the Southern Baptist Convention. And colleges, universities, they will come out. You have a lot of the thought leadership, and they'll present books. And I remember a book from my youth called by Leroy Brownlow. Some of you are going to remember this book. It's called Why I'm a Member of the Church of Christ. And it went through in detail everything about why you're a member of the Church of Christ and set out orthodoxy for the Church of Christ. And it's an interesting book to read. And I look on it now and I go like, man, was he messed up? So, because some of it doesn't apply to what we do and we practice. All right, so my last one is church polity, church leadership, I think should be on a local level. And I think that's the way it was set up by the apostles. And I think it's the way it should continue today. Our church doesn't get to decide what happens over here at this Baptist church or this Methodist church, and guess what? They don't get to decide what we do. And what happens at our church doesn't get decided by Abilene Christian University or Lubbock Christian or anybody else. And you can kind of go through those things and said, our church knows what our issues are, and we're going to deal with those. And that is something that I think you learn from these things. And when you get outside of that, I think you get into problems. Now, is it beneficial to get together and talk about things? A lot of times it is. You learn stuff and you get to challenge and you get things like, original sin. If you're going to buy into original sin, does that mean Jesus inherited sin? I won't solve that question today, but it is one that's there. All right. Latin Logan, he's outside, so we're going to get the word of the week. Rule. You know what that one is? It's from the Latin regula, and it means a straight piece of wood. We would call it a ruler, right? Not like an emperor ruler, but a ruler. It's the root word for that, and it's also the root word for rules. And it's also used to describe, in fact, this is where it came from, was the trellis that held the vineyard up. All right, so that's actually where the root from this is. That's what those were called at first, regula, out there. All right, that kind of comes into play in a second. An abbot, you've heard that term, because we're moving into a different thing. We're through the Ephesus and all that. And an abbot is from the Greek abbas, meaning father. Jesus prayed, Abba, Father. And we have that. Abbot is just an anglicized word meaning father. All right. So, my wife has known to say this to our kids. You know the rules. All right. So let's find out what the rules are. Let's see. What is the rule of law? And I want feedback now. The rule of law. Okay, I'm not getting any feedback, so I'll prime the pump a little bit. That's basically the laws that are written down. It's what Congress passes, everything else. It's the rule of law. It's how we conduct civil and criminal business in our world. That's the rule of law. How about if you've heard of the rule of thirds? Anybody ever heard the rule of thirds? It's a photography term that's used to basically you divide what you're taking a picture of into three things and try to make them equal, 3 across, 3 up. That's the rule of thirds. You can look it up. All right. How about the rule of 72? Nate? No? Nobody? This is a term that you can use this in mortgage and stuff, or any interest-bearing thing. Is basically you take 72 divided by the interest rate, and that's how long it's going to take for you to pay back whatever it was that you loaned. That's the rule of 72. You know the rules, right? One more, rule of thumb. Mickey, come on. Yeah.
Whatever you believe.
Whatever you believe. He's holding his thumb up. It's kind of like, generally this is kind of the way things happen, right? There is no rule of thumb, right? I looked at that and I thought, okay, how do we get these things? So, all right, without regula, all right, a vine would crawl along the ground and produce little fruit. Not very good, right? With a regula, the vine can reach its full potential. You ever think about that? If you don't have those vines propped up, it's not going to produce good fruit. All right, a Christian regula does the same thing. It provides a supportive framework for spiritual growth, enabling a person basically to abide in the vine and bear much fruit. All right, is it good to have rules? And I'm going to see a lot of heads go like this because a lot of people have kids in here. All right, so let's talk about the guy that set the rules. This is Benedict of Nursia. He lived from 480 to 547, and he is the father of Western monasticism. He was born to a Roman noble family, which meant that he was at least probably upper middle class, and he had a good education. And when he got to be a young man, he did what all good Roman families did. You sent him to Rome, right? So he goes to Rome to study rhetoric, among other things, around 500 AD. What's he going to find in Rome? Now, this, by the way, is after the fall of Rome, so things have gotten really, there's not a lot of rules going on. But so what does he find in Rome? Well, it is not a pretty picture. In fact, he was so, I'll just use the word traumatized. This was a good guy. This was a good kid. And he gets there and it's like sending a good kid to Las Vegas and say, okay, you're free and easy to go do whatever you want in Las Vegas. Well, I'll tell you what little I've seen to Las Vegas, I don't ever want to go back, but I haven't seen anything good coming out of Las Vegas or that you can be up to. So he sees the immoral Rome and he says, and he actually ran away. His parents have sent him off. He's out of the house. He's not going back home. So he says, I can stay in this immoral Rome and lose my soul, or I can live out as an ascetic life. And so he says, I'm going to go live in a cave. And so he goes out and does that, meets another monastic fellow that kind of introduces him to that way of life, and he actually lives in a cave for a couple of years. A lot better than Rome. He has a very devout reputation, and so a local group comes to him and says, we really like what you're doing up here. Come be our priest, or come be our abbot, come be our father. And he's kind of going like, most of everything that's written about Benedict was written by one of the popes later on. And he said their manners were diverse from his, and they would never agree together. And that's so true, yeah, because Benedict likes the rules. All right, it's not a fit. He survived. These people that want to make him abbot, they tried to poison him twice, and there's some legendary stories about them giving him a piece of bread, and a raven comes down, takes the bread, and flies off. Another that he's given a goblet with poison in it, and as soon as he gets it, he prays over the goblet, and it shatters in his hand. All right, so you got things like that are going on with Benedict. So he basically went back to the cave and said, I'm going back here. And there's a priest named Florientius, and he attempts to seduce him by sending prostitutes up to him. And he tried to poison him too. So, it's kind of like, who's after him? And that little devil in the picture we saw a while ago, that's really the guy that's after him. All right, and so around 530, he goes south and he establishes the monastery at Monte Cassino, and that's still there today. You'll see a picture of that in a minute. And that's what he's going to do. And basically, he establishes it, and he has people like-minded that are going to join him. And while he's there, he's going to write the Regula. We call it the Rule of St. Benedict, but it's just the rule. But not rules, not plural, it's just the Rule of St. Benedict. Now, I think I've got a little theory on this, is that people will gravitate to rules. there's comfort in those and everything else like that. And when you get into troublesome times, like they would have been, they gravitate there. Some of it is if you have rules that you follow, you don't have to think. It absolves you from responsibility. All right. So he's going to come in with a pretty regimented set of rules. And that's basically what it is. So let's look at a couple of these. So this is him giving the rules to that. And by the way, maybe next spring I'm going to talk about art, Christian art through the ages. I think that I'm fascinated by it. So we'll kind of do on there. Well, his primary vows in his rule is stability, meaning you stay here and you don't leave. You can't run away from your problems. You need to stay here, face them, work them out. That was one of his first rules, was once you commit to this, you're committed. The other is conversion of life. You're going to give everything you have to this life. You're going to give up all your money. You're going to give up your family. You're going to give up everything to this way of life. And the other is you're going to have obedience. And in this book, about half of it is about obedience. It's about how do you obey? And it's pretty interesting. It's like no talking at dinner. If somebody has something that you are at your meal, if somebody has something, you need to be aware of it and you need to pass it to them. If you can't, if they don't need it, you need to signal them so that they will pass it to you, but you don't talk about that stuff. One of the reasons is because they're going to be reading or reciting scripture all during the meal. So interesting stuff. So the principal topics of the rule are prayer, work, study, moderation, humility, and obedience. And that's what he's going to hammer these things over and over and over again, not just in the rule, but in their whole thing. All right. A day in the life of a monk. I want to just kind of go through this. This is going to be their rules. And I was aware of this, but putting it down and seeing it like this makes you think a little bit differently about it. Pray and work, that's ora et labora, basically pray and work. And there's another book called Practicing the Presence of God that was written about another 1,000 years later than that, which basically follows up on this. So first of all, there's a liturgy of the hours, and let's go through this thing. Their day began at midnight. So 12 a.m., it's called matins. They get up and they pray. And usually a lot of their prayers were the Psalms. Most of these monks, by the time it gets going full blown, have all 150 Psalms memorized. The reason they have them memorized, because that's what they're reciting over and over and over again. And in the middle of the night, you may not have candles. You're expected to recite these. Let's go through it, And so you can do that. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You kind of go through the whole thing. At 3 a.m., it's called lauds. Let's get up. Let's do it again. All right, let's have our prayers. Then we can go back to bed. 6 a.m., prime. You're going to have a private mass, so you have your quiet time. You're going to have spiritual reading, and you work, because some people needed to get to work earlier and later, and so that's the other thing, is you work. 9 a.m., terce. This is high mass. This is actually when you're going to get a message from the abbot or somebody else, but yeah, usually the abbot's going to give you a message in this time. That's high mass. Chants, songs are going on. At noon, that's when you get your meal of the day. How many meals do you get a day? One. All right. And that's called sext. It's the midday meal. And you have communal recreation. This is when you go out and play soccer or whatever monks do. All right. And you rest. And I'm going to say I need a nap right about then too. All right. 3 p.m. is I think I said that right. And that's when you do your farming, your housekeeping, and you do that until it gets dark outside. And then at 6 p.m. is Vespers. Let's have another service. We're going to do Vespers, sing songs, read Psalms. And then at 9 p.m. is Compline. And then after that, you go to bed. All right. That is every day, 7 days a week. Is anybody ready to sign up? I get impressed that people would do this. All right. So the enduring legacy of Benedict, because we are running right up against it. One of them is a call to live a Christian life with discipline and community. That's the first thing. He says, you're going to stay here. You're going to live this with community because there's good things about that. And you're going to live it a disciplined life. And so when Kat says we need to pay more attention to some of the Christian disciplines, I could not agree more. There's so many that we could do. By the way, this is the Monte Cassino. This is what's there today. As you can see, that is a huge, huge place. Still a Benedictine monastery. All right. The other is examples of Christian living. This was not the type of withdrawal from the world. Benedictines were known for being part of the community at large. They took in orphans. They took sick people and they healed the sick, practiced the healing arts. When other armies came in and they came to these groups, they didn't mess with them because they said, "Oh, you're going to do that for us too?" Yeah, we do that for anybody. And they got no money. Now that changes a little bit, but they don't have any money. And so why go take these guys when they're just following Christ? All right. Education, they are the ones that are going to carry on the educational tradition. Your best thinkers are going to come out of the Benedictines as we go on. The other is preservation of Scripture. One of the things that they were known for was copying and making meticulous copies of Scripture. And so we can thank the Benedictines for that today. Another is the economy or the economics of thrift. Wherever a Benedictine monastery got established during this period of time became an economic zone of wealth because they're producing more food than they can eat, so they're sharing their food because they're not going to own it. They're doing all sorts of things through this that help out the local community, and so they are part of the community, and they're examples of living for Christ. Another is their standard for monastic orders. All other monastic orders after this basically are modeled off of the Rule of St. Benedict. All right, and there's a dozen of them or so. Some of their unintended contributions that came about, hospitals, hostels or hotels, good beer, all right, fine wine, chocolate, cheese, and some pretty cool chants too if you really go listen to them. Those are some of the things that maybe you think about when we think of Benedictines. But those are all the things because they had the time, they weren't involved, and they weren't trying to make their living. They're making a living for Christ and to share those things. Questions or comments? Because we're up against it. Anything, Jesse, online? Okay. How should we then live? I think we can draw lessons from the Benedictines. I think just like we can look at what happened in the Ecumenical Council and say, like, that's how not to settle church differences. This is one of the ways it's like, even in spite of all the other things going on, how do you live? And I think we do our call to be part of the community and to be engaged with it and to serve it. All right? So that's one of the things. Next lesson, which will be December 7th. Next 2 weeks are off. And it's going to start the church in the Middle Ages. And there's some really, really cool things that happen in there. So looking forward to that. And thank you for your attention tonight.